The new House Leader is with me live in studio now to talk about the upcoming year. Hi, Minister. Good to have you here.
Thanks for having me, Vassy, and Happy New Year.
Thanks. Same to you. I appreciate you making the time. You said right after you were sworn in this morning that the government will be, quote, laser focused on the issues of affordability and more accessible housing. Do you anticipate introducing specific pieces of legislation to that effect?
Well, I'll let the minister speak to that. But I think you'd have to be living under a rock to not understand very clearly that Canadians are feeling the increased cost pressures associated with housing, obviously, specifically, but with the run-up in global inflation as well. So the government's been very fixated on that for a long time now, and we will continue to stay fixated on that. Very happy to see inflation coming down, but until Canadians really feel that in their monthly budgets, the government will stay very, very focused.
Do you concede that they're not feeling that right now?
Well, of course we can. I mean, I'm a member of Parliament. There are 338 of us. We get around our constituencies. Ministers do as well. We understand that there are cost pressures facing Canadians that kind of took us all by surprise. We had a pandemic. Then this major run-up in inflation due to the pandemic and a number of other global factors. And the government has, I think, had to deal with that coming on we had 20 years of basically zero interest rates. So the government's had to adjust. It has adjusted. You've seen a number of measures be put forward, both in budgets, fall economic statements, seminal piece of legislation that was passed with respect to taking the GST off of rental, new construction of rental units, and to open up competition issues in the grocery sector. So some very targeted, specific measures have been put forward, and I know more will come.
I want to ask you just about that more specifically, though, and what perhaps more could look like. Because I think when you characterize, for example, those pieces of legislation as seminal, some Canadians might not be convinced of that yet. Mm-hmm. For example, changing the Competition Act. For sure, maybe in the future, that will have an impact on grocery prices. But it was also your government a number of months ago who was saying prices have to stabilize by Thanksgiving or else to the grocery industry. They didn't stabilize. In fact, they continue to increase above headline inflation. What more is your government prepared to do to address that cost of living crisis, particularly, let's say, around grocery prices?
Well, the minister, I will remind you, had a series of meetings with, and I think continues to have a series of meetings with the grocery chain executives. He first told them that the government would act. The government did act. The government acted in legislation. We consulted all of Parliament, got some useful suggestions, and made that even tougher. So there are new strengthened competition provisions in the grocery sector, and we continue to dialogue with those grocery chains, very focused on food inflation, very focused on what you call headline inflation as well. Costs are going up for Canadians, and the government understands that. The government wants to deal with that. The government wants to help Canadians as they go through their monthly budgets.
But what has changed for Canadians in their monthly budgets from, for example, when your government was saying we're going to see those prices stabilize by Thanksgiving until now? I mean, I'm sure you went to the grocery store over Christmas. It's incredibly expensive still. I think the latest data from Stats Can showed that grocery prices were increasing at a rate of 4.7% compared to headline inflation at 3.1%. You made those threats. Can you understand how Canadians might conceive of them as empty at this point?
Well, we acted on them, and it's good policy. You know, because policy can sometimes take time to take effect, it doesn't mean you don't act on it. And the Parliament of Canada passing a law is a supreme act. But you are seeing inflation coming down, not quickly enough to anyone's taste, but inflation is coming down, costs are coming down, and hopefully more and more relief is on its way for Canadians as we act on housing, as we act on a number of fronts. Gas prices, I know, fluctuate, but have generally seen downward pressure. So, you know, Canadians are seeing some relief, but we're going to stay very, very focused on this.
And I'll ask you about housing in a second, but respectfully, Minister, I do have to continue to challenge you on the grocery front because, okay, you brought in Competition Act changes, but that wasn't all you were threatening to do. Your government was saying they have to stabilize or else. For example, we will consider a wealth tax or an excess profits tax. You didn't detail that in the fall economic statement when you had the opportunity to. You haven't since. Is that still on the table? Because the grocery stores have not, you know, beyond what they normally do, to a great degree, lowered their prices across the board.
I'm going to let the industry minister announce his own policies, and between now and then, what I would say is that the government has had a lot of items on its dialogue list with the grocery chains, with food suppliers, and additionally, and with others. And we want to make sure we stay very focused on food inflation. But the industry minister has had a major accomplishment with these Competition Act changes, and that doesn't preclude other actions in the future.
So you're not ruling that tax off the table?
I'm not ruling anything in or out. I'm just saying that the industry minister has an open dialogue with these grocery chains and obviously a government-wide focus on this very important issue.
Does that mean tangibly for Canadians watching tonight, though, that your government, if there is no impact on the bottom line for those Canadians, is prepared to do more, as you had previously threatened you would? Or was that an empty threat?
The government's very focused more generally on providing and helping, understanding, first of all, that Canadians are feeling these cost pressures, at targeting efforts where possible, where federal government action is possible, to relieving those cost pressures on Canadians, and making sure that life becomes easier for people that are facing higher interest rates or facing higher inflation. At the same time, we're very relieved that inflation seems to be coming off the boil all around the world. You're seeing it come down all across the West, and down, in fact, even more so in Canada. So we have a very good...
You're not purporting to say that 4.7%
No,
increases in food annually is okay.
The job is not done. We know food costs continue to outpace inflation costs, but at the same time, we understand that those rates are declining, and that is a good thing.
I also want to talk to you very briefly about the housing side of things, because you have listed off, and I think our Canadians watching will understand, a number of supply-side measures that have been introduced by your government that will have a tangible impact, hundreds of thousands of homes. The goal, though, set out by the CMHC in order to restore affordability, by 2030 was the creation of 3.5 million units above and beyond what was already planned. I know that, again, on the supply side, there are a number of things that have been introduced. On the demand side, what we saw just before Christmas from Stats Can was that there's been a huge jump in the population in the third quarter of the year. It grew by more than 430,000 people. 313,000 of those people were non-permanent residents. Is your government looking at the possibility, just while the acute housing crisis is going on, of limiting that number or capping that number? It's primarily comprised of students, temporary students, international students, and temporary foreign workers.
But not all composed of that. But
some are refugees.
I think we understand and recognize that is an issue. I think you've seen the immigration minister announce some measures with respect to international students.
Not a cap,
and continue to talk about that and the dialogue. Well, it's a complex problem. It involves provinces and accrediting post-secondary institutions and such. And then at the same time, you've seen Minister Fraser, the housing minister, really change the paradigm when it comes to planning housing across the country, signed landmark agreements with a number of municipalities right across Canada, and of course with my own province, the province of Quebec, which will, on the planning side, which will permit better growth, better infill, a lot of good urban policy generally, but specifically measures that will get an awful lot of housing units up and under construction. The last piece of that puzzle, of course, is interest rates, which obviously is a drag on developing real estate, and you know, of course, that's within the purview of the Bank of Canada. But we all hope that interest rate relief is on its way as well.
And certainly, Minister, I'm not taking away from what your government has introduced so far. Again, focused on the supply side. I'm just asking, as the person who will shepherd in legislation or shepherd in the government's agenda, whether you are entertaining a cap, because though the issue is cross-jurisdictional, the federal government's ability to limit the number of temporary residents, even temporarily in Canada, is all within your jurisdiction.
It is indeed, absolutely. And I know that Minister Miller, the immigration minister, is very, very focused on that and very seized with that. He's in constant discussions on this issue.
So it's not off the table either.
We well understand the pressures. I'm not going to put anything on the table or off the table. I'm not, on my first day, going to announce policy for my new colleagues in Cabinet. I'll let them, they're quite capable of of doing that for themselves. But I know very clearly that the government is very focused on this issue, on demand and supply, and we will continue to be looking at it, and I'm sure that we'll have more developments as the year progresses.
Okay, just really quickly before I let you go, Minister, I know that you received some questions during your swearing in on this, on the Prime Minister's vacation in Jamaica. We're talking about affordability right now. The Prime Minister went, his office said initially they were covering the costs, and then updated that to say that no, in fact, it was at a friend's and it was free, basically. The National Post is reporting it's about $9,000 a night to stay there. I know that you said today that this was checked with the Ethics Commissioner, that the rules were met, that the Ethics Commissioner cleared this trip. Do you understand in this cost of living environment, though, why it would feel tone deaf to some Canadians?
You know, I haven't spoken to a person in my constituency. I spent a lot of time in Gatineau over the Christmas period. No one begrudges the Prime Minister and his family a holiday over the Christmas period. It's very complicated to be the Prime Minister and have security constraints imposed upon you by officials to make sure that your movements are all within the agreed upon policy of either the Defense Department or your security personnel. Those are decisions, obviously, that are made in accordance with policy. And overlaid on that is, of course, the very stringent ethics requirements that all public office holders must hold. The Prime Minister made a commitment to clear these arrangements in advance. That's what he did. And the fact that you and I are here speaking about it today is that the pillar of those arrangements is that there be transparency. The rules have been followed. The Prime Minister went away with his family over Christmas. I think all Canadians celebrate the fact that we have a Prime Minister who can get away with his family over Christmas.
And certainly my question is not aimed at begrudging a holiday. The people that you spoke to are likely employed by the government, as many are in Gatineau, and have a pretty steady income. There are
not everyone.
But there are a number of Canadians who don't. And I'm just asking simply in that vein. You know, is a $90,000 free vacation something that you would take in this economic environment, given the issues that Canadians are facing at this moment? Do you understand how they would perceive it as tone deaf?
I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I think the Prime Minister has a very clear understanding, has certainly spoken very directly with all of us about his understanding of the pressures that Canadians are facing. That is why that the instructions, and we are under there's no ambiguity here. The entire government is acting under the very clear direction of the Prime Minister that we are to be focused on the daily lives of Canadians, on the cost pressures that they faced, and that we make sure that we make life more affordable and housing more accessible for Canadians.
And can Canadians be assured, you know, as was the case during the Aga Khan trip, that there is, you know, nothing expected in exchange for a free trip?
Again, that's what the ethics rules are about. Those ethics rules are transparent. That's why we're talking about them here this evening. The Prime Minister took all the steps he needed to take to get these arrangements pre-approved. That was done in accordance with the rules. The Prime Minister's vacation, look, rarely ceases, whether it's this Prime Minister or previous Prime Ministers. I remember talking about Mr. Harper's vacations. I remember before that talking about Mr. Martin's and Mr. Chrétien's. We have this odd fixation on prime ministerial vacations, but prime ministers of all parties, leaders of all parties, MPs of all parties, it's a good idea, trust me, that they get away and clear their heads
and
for a little bit over Christmas.
And like I said, no one's begrudging anyone taking a vacation. It's just the type of the vacation in times like this that I think generates the questions. But I will leave it there. Minister, I appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Vassy.